It is 3 p.m. in Moscow, watching RT International. I'm Marina Joshi. Welcome to the program. Now, the German Chancellor and French President will meet with Russia's President in Moscow this Friday. They'll discuss the Ukrainian crisis and ways to de-escalate the conflict there. For more on this, let's now cross to our correspondent, Eunan O'Neill. So, Eunan, this is a high-profile meeting, after all. What do we know about it?
Well, we know that the German Chancellor and the French President will arrive here in Moscow tomorrow for talks on the situation in Ukraine. That is now being confirmed by Vladimir Putin's spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov. In a press conference in Paris earlier, Francois Hollande stated that he and Chancellor Merkel had come up with, quote, new suggestions for settling the crisis in East Ukraine. Added that he hoped that they would be suitable for both sides and that the time for diplomacy cannot go on forever. In fact, let's listen to what he had to say in his own words now.
I spoke with Chancellor Merkel for some days and decided to do this. We want to go with the aim not just of talking, but of agreeing a text that will satisfy all the parties involved. So after visiting Kiev, we will go to President Putin. The meeting will be based on the document that we are going to draw up: France, Germany, Ukraine, and also Vladimir Putin.
This meeting is set to take place amid some of the worst violence in East Ukraine since the conflict erupted back in April last year. It also comes as Washington mulls over the idea of sending deadly weapons to Kiev to continue the war in that region of the country. The Secretary of State for the US, John Kerry, is already in Kiev meeting with Petro Poroshenko, Ukraine's president. Later today, Petro Poroshenko will meet up with Chancellor Merkel and President Hollande for more talks. A point to add as well, President Hollande said during his press conference that he does not think that Ukraine should join NATO. A lot coming out of that press conference, but that is the news we know at the moment.
All right, Eunan, thanks so much for bringing us this update. Eunan O'Neill there. And let's take a look at the relationship between Paris and Moscow now. In December, Hollande was the first senior Western leader to visit Russia after the referendum in Crimea. He dropped by for a surprise meeting with President Putin in one of Moscow's airports. The French president has also been calling for an easing of sanctions against Russia and assured the global community that Moscow has no plans to annex eastern Ukraine. But stumbling blocks remain. France failed to deliver the first of 2 Mistral warships back in November. Moscow paid $1.5 billion for the helicopter carriers 5 years ago. However, relations between Angela Merkel and Vladimir Putin have been harder hit by the Ukrainian crisis. In March, she was quoted by the New York Times as saying that Russia's president had lost touch with reality. That comment reportedly came in a phone call with President Obama. Geopolitical analyst Martin McCauley says the German and French leaders are likely to push for the restoration of healthy business relations between the countries.
They've decided to go to Moscow, so therefore the situation, from their point of view, is becoming serious. It's becoming very, very serious indeed in Ukraine, especially eastern Ukraine, and they want to find some solution which will halt the attacks, halt the fighting, halt the killing and so on. They don't want the Americans to escalate the conflict in Ukraine, eastern Ukraine. That is hanging over these negotiations because Merkel and Hollande will not decide the military factor. They will be talking about economic and they'll be appealing for peace and so on. There's an economic interest on both sides to weaken these sanctions and get back to normal economic relations. That said, President Hollande is in a more difficult position because the French economy is not doing very well. So he will be the one who's more keen to make concessions so that business can start again.